Hello, everyone. This is Katrin with Disability Rights New York. Welcome to our podcast, Empire State of Rights Closed Captioned. We are here to bring you information on the most relevant topics regarding disability rights and advocacy. Today, we have Julie Michaels Keegan, PAD and PATBI Director at DRNY, here to discuss how to effectively communicate with your child's education team. So school has just started. We're in September now, and a lot of parents have some questions about how they should be effectively communicating with their school and their child's education team. What are some things that parents should start to consider this year?
Well, it can be really overwhelming to communicate with school. A lot of times parents of students with disabilities have a lot of well-founded concerns. They're scared for their children are going off into the hands of other folks for 8 hours a day, and it can be really intimidating. Couple that with the fact that you have these special education laws and rights along with other school rules. It can be a very overwhelming process. But on the other hand, becoming a comfortable, confident, competent member of your child's educational team can really make a difference for your child.
That's great. And so as parents are getting ready to have these conversations and meetings, what are some common complaints that parents are having with the relationship with school?
There are a lot of complaints, and some of them are well-founded. You know, each school district is different. Everybody's communication style is different. But when we really get down to it, a lot of times parents either feel that their opinion doesn't matter, or they're not able to get information. They may not be able to access staff or the information they're looking for. The meetings may be too fast, not enough time to get the information out that they're seeking or wanting to share. And unfortunately, there's often sort of a me versus them mentality, so it feels like it's a conflict or it's a battle, and I have to win or I have to secure the rights of my child. And when we start communication with that kind of a thought process, it can really sabotage a relationship that's characterized by mutual respect. I think the most important thing to remember is that everybody is there for the child, and often keeping the focus on the child rather than the relationships is really what's going to make a difference.
I'm sure it can be frustrating on both ends to have communication that isn't working. So how important is it to build that level of communication with your team players before the school year really gets going?
I think it's incredibly important, and it can really make the difference or a make it or break it year with your child's team. That said, I think we can always improve or work on or repair communication even if we're off to a bad start. So these are things I think anybody could use through the year. But if we are able to have effective communication with our educational team, first of all, you're going to have a lot less surprises. You're not going to get that sudden call that Johnny has violated some code of school conduct and you're being asked to pick them up. You're going to be able to get access to information about your child a lot quicker. You will also have a more receptive team, meaning that they will be more interested in hearing your ideas, as long as you're also listening to the ideas and observations that they have. It also is a way to make sure there's consistency between home and school. A lot of students with disabilities do struggle with behavioral issues, which can be very challenging across the board and really lead to a lot of conflict. I'd say here at Disability Rights New York, that's one of the most common complaints we have, is just communication breakdown and conflict, and it's often related to a child who has challenging behaviors. So if we can have those communications between home and school, we can also ensure there's consistency between home and school. So for example, if there's a behavior plan in place at school, then the parents supporting that plan at home, learning more about it and not undermining it can make a big difference. And the reality is if we can build those communications when it does come time for a meeting of the Committee on Special Education, the CSE, then there's going to be more of an open discussion. And that's really what Congress intended when Congress said we need to have all of these people at the table. We need a school district person, we need a psychologist, we need the parent, we need the student. We need the people who are teaching the child and providing services to the child, because each one really brings a unique perspective and a unique expertise. And that includes the parent, and that includes the student. So if we can have a relationship with those people, then we're going to have a much more productive discussion and a better plan for the child.
So a lot of times, thinking about putting these communications together, parents may not know where to start. Can you give me some specific strategies for building the communication that we need to have meaningful participation?
Sure. The first strategy to think about is, how am I going to communicate? What form is that going to take? And I'm going to talk about a few. So one of those is the idea of a team meeting. Many times parents are only attending meetings for annual review, meaning they're meeting once a year to discuss their child's IEP for the following year. But a lot of times, if we have a child with complex needs or complex behaviors, more frequent meetings may be necessary. They don't have to be Committee on Special Education meetings. They could just be what I call team meetings, and that involves the folks who are really doing hands-on work with the child, the teacher, the speech therapist if there's one, an OT person, a counselor, a social worker, whoever happens to be working with that child. These are particularly helpful if it is important to have consistency between home and school, because everybody's sharing information. It can also be helpful if the child has unique needs or behaviors, and those could be medical, those could be struggling with a particular kind of learning because of a disability related to reading or math or something like that. They're very helpful too if the child is starting in a new program or a new school, because that brings its own hurdles. A lot of kids with disabilities really need consistency, and when we throw a new program, a new teacher, a new environment in, it can really create some problems. So good communication can make a big difference there. So I don't think we need team meetings every week. That's a very rare occurrence, but I think scheduling team meetings maybe once a quarter or once a month, if it's a more intensive issue, can be very helpful. And then it's on people's calendars and can move forward. So team meetings is definitely something to think about. Another option is to have individual meetings. This is useful when there's a particular issue. So maybe one teacher is struggling with a child, or the child is struggling in one class, or the child is struggling in one area. Let's say a less structured area. A child's really struggling on the playground, or child may be experiencing bullying or something along those lines. Sometimes a face-to-face meeting or a phone meeting, can work also, can really set the tone for more open communication. A lot of parents these days are using email or phone contact, and I think that can be very effective. I think teachers like to use email often because it's easy, they can be responsive. We don't have to worry about each other's schedules in trying to find a time that works for everybody and playing phone tag. The only thing I would caution around phone and email contact is to put yourself in the shoes of the person who's receiving it. I have seen emails from parents that are really as long as doctoral theses, and we know that if we receive an email like that, it's something that we might set aside for a minute because we just don't have time to go through all that. So I think when we're communicating by email, it's really important to what is the heart of the matter here. And if you're feeling like I need to put a lot of background in here, then I think it might be better to have a phone conversation or an in-person meeting. Otherwise, short, sweet, to the point seems to work very well. So those are ways to bolster communication and develop some relationships with the individuals on your child's educational team.
Great. So around building communication and thinking about all the strategies you just gave us really seems like the foundation to build mutual respect through these communications. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it is very important for there to be, for mutual respect to be a goal. Again, many of us, I'm speaking as a parent now, have very significant mother bear, papa bear instincts. And so we tend to be very defensive around our children, and there's nothing wrong with that. We are our child's best advocate, and there's no getting around that. On the other hand, though, from your own experience, if you approach a conversation or a communication with a hostile attitude, you're doing a bad job, you don't get my kid, you're not doing the right thing for my child, that automatically puts the other person on the defense. And that closes down communication. That person isn't going to be listening to what you have to say. They're going to be worried about defending what they're doing. So I think if we can approach a conversation with a neutral, trying to be as neutral as possible, attitude, it's going to help. I think asking questions of the person that are related to their perspective also shows them that you have some interest in what they have to say. So asking about what their expectations are so that you have a better understanding of that. Asking about progress. What progress is my child making, instead of my child's making no progress in reading, what are you going to do about it? But taking the approach of Johnny really seems to be struggling with reading. Are you seeing progress, or what do you think is getting in the way? Using some open-ended questions like that and asking sort of for their input and observation is very helpful. You may end up disagreeing with their perspective, but it's still important to understand their perspective, especially if you want them to understand yours. It's also important to ask what their recommendations are. What do you think would help here? I don't think parents always realize that teachers are working, there are many variables impacting them. They often have classes that may be too big, they may not have the support they need. There's all these demands on what needs to be taught in the curriculum, testing, all of these things. And so it may feel like the teacher may not be paying enough attention, but I think if we can say, is there anything I can advocate for that would give you the support you need? That is a very helpful question, because a lot of times that's what it is. And I think we as parents and members of the Committee on Special Education, we are uniquely able to say at a CSE meeting, I think Johnny may need some direct consultant teacher work, or may need the assistance of an aide, because this seems to be taking a lot of the teacher's time, and he's really struggling as a result of this. That way, you have supported the teacher and built a relationship that way, without the teacher having to fight for something that they very well may not be able to secure. So that's something for us to think about.
So obviously there can be a lot of emotion involved in these meetings and the communications. As parents, what are some pitfalls that they need to be aware of and try to avoid?
Well, I call these the communication assassins. And frankly, again, this is common sense, but it's just some things to think about. Being very rigid in your thinking often leads to conflict, and often it sabotages the best outcomes for the child. So instead of saying he needs this and there's nothing else that's possibly going to work, and if you don't do this, I'm going to, exercise all my rights. There's a time and place for that, but for the most part, especially when we're establishing communication or trying to repair it, I think it's important to be open-minded. Again, I mentioned earlier that there are a lot of people at the table with different expertise to offer, and so hearing other ideas is helpful, and sharing your ideas is equally helpful, and then getting creative about how to move from there. Another communication assassin is blaming or accusing. That seems to sabotage things very quickly. I think everybody has an understanding of that too. If you're going to go right on the defensive, rather than asking open-ended questions, which might be more helpful. Yelling, screaming, not super common things that occur at CSE meetings, but do sometimes occur. That's not helpful. You as a parent are getting very emotional at that point, and you may feel emotional, but letting that out in that forum may not be the best thing. An easy thing to do there, if you find yourself really getting upset, is to just take a break. Could I take a minute in the hall? Could I take a couple minutes in the hall? Threatening people won't get you very far, and rehashing the past is also a problem. So we may be starting fresh this year, but the parent may be feeling like, well, you didn't do right by my child last year. I have no belief that you're going to do right by my child this year, and I'm going to point out all the ways that you've failed my child in the past. Again, there's a time and a place for that. Certainly, if the child isn't making progress, there are ways to exercise your rights, maybe getting an independent evaluation, maybe making a state complaint, but using those tools that the law affords us is much more effective than, going ahead and screaming at people. Another thing that can be helpful, and I have heard universally that this has really helped a lot of parents, especially parents who tend to get emotional at CSE meetings, is really preparing for a CSE meeting. And so I often encourage parents to sort of make a chart, and if you can kind of picture a chart in your mind, the first column would be sort of identifying a concern, the specific concern or the issue that you have. For example, Johnny is not making any progress in reading. Okay, that's a concern. That makes sense. But the second column is, what's the basis for that concern? What is making you feel that way? And I think being able to point to concrete things can be much more compelling than just putting it out there, Johnny's not making any progress. So you may be talking about, he's really struggling with reading at home. He can't read his homework assignments. He cries when he has to read. These are all very specific, things that indicate that the child may be struggling with reading, and are things that people can relate to. Then in the third column is to think about, what are some questions I can ask around this issue? A lot of people, I think, would think that third column should be, what outcome do I want out of this? But really, it should be, what can I ask about that will get the team talking about how to resolve this problem? So questions like, is he crying at school when he has to read? Is he volunteering when he has to read? Is he performing or improving at the same rate of other students in his class? What do you think are the biggest barriers to his reading? When you start asking the team those kinds of questions, then you get a discussion going. And people start buying into the idea that maybe Johnny is struggling with reading, and you're going to come up with a better solution.
In all of the meetings and the communication, how important is follow-up, and how often should parents be following up?
So, follow-up is important, and I'm an attorney, so I'm always going to say we always need to be following up in writing, but we do. And there's a few reasons for that. I mean, certainly there is the idea that if it isn't in writing, it never occurred, right? And that may be deliberate, but more often it's just the school is dealing with many, many students and many, many parents, and it's easy for a discussion to get forgotten or an agreement to get forgotten. So following up in writing, thanks for the meeting today, or it was a great conversation with you today. I'm glad we agreed that Johnny is going to now get resource room to help him with reading, or we're going to communicate on a weekly basis on how he's doing for his reading, or something like that. But just not a book, not rehashing the whole thing, but just thanks for the meeting today. This is what we agreed to, and leaving it at that.
All right, so is there anything else that you want to share with us on how to have, the most effective meetings you can have, how to get the best outcomes for your child while they're at school? Anything else you want to add today?
Yeah, there's a couple things. One is, it's important to stay organized. There are a lot of papers associated with school, even if your child doesn't have a disability. And if your child does have a disability and they have an IEP, an individualized education plan, or a 504 plan, then you have more documentation that's required to go along with that. Having those records on hand, having the evaluations, the communications from the district, past IEPs, in in a place where you can easily access them can be really important. So creating a binder, maybe for each year, or creating a binder and separating it by IEPs and evaluations and report cards, but having some central place where you can just keep this information in one spot can be incredibly helpful. There's nothing worse than getting into a meeting and saying, yeah, but there was something in some document, whereas if you have it in front of you or you can easily access it, it's going to be a lot more effective. So that's definitely one thing I would keep in mind. But another thing is, and this is, again, particularly important for parents of students with disabilities, is really understanding your rights and your child's rights. And it can be overwhelming. It's a big federal law, and there's state law too that work on, that address what your rights are around special education. But thankfully, there are a lot of resources that can help a parent understand those rights. A couple of those might be the New York State Special Education Task Force puts out a document called Special Education in Plain Language. And I know we will provide the information on how to access that, but it's basically at the website www.nysspechaledtaskforce.com. And looking there can be helpful. There's guides on bullying there as well, if that's something that your child's experiencing. But it basically takes what the regulations say and puts them in plain language in a question and answer format. And we have found that a lot of parents find that to be particularly helpful. Another option is to check out your local parent center. State Ed funds 13 parent centers across the state. There's one in every region. A list of the parent centers is available on the state education website. Those parent centers are staffed by special education specialists who are there to help parents understand their rights, help them understand an IEP, help them perhaps advocate for what help that they might need, help with writing a letter or reviewing a letter. But they are really very knowledgeable and skilled. Here at DRNY, we typically will ask people to reach out to their parent center before coming here because they're just a wealth of information. They all provide trainings also, and on often on topics that I've covered here, and other topics like discipline or bullying or how to be successful in a CSE meeting. But I would definitely be reaching out to parent centers. They're very, very helpful. In terms of communication specifically, the New York State Special Education Task Force also put together a video that's very comprehensive and specifically discusses communication breakdowns, communication barriers, and communication strategies. We interviewed parents, advocates, and school personnel, like Committee on Special Education chair people, and administrators. And we asked them all similar questions. What works? What doesn't work? What do you find to be effective? What do you find to be ineffective? It's a very valuable video. It's on the Special Education Task Force website as well as the DRNY website. But I would really encourage anyone who's wanting to establish better communication with their district to have a look at that.
All right, well, Julie, thank you so much for your time. Those are some great resources we heard about at the end, and we'll list them all on the YouTube channel once this is up and posted. Is there anything else you want to add today?
I don't at this time. I really appreciate the opportunity being able to share this information because speaking from personal experience, the communication can really make a big difference, and I would encourage everyone to try to embrace some of these strategies.
Okay, great, and thank you so much for your time. Empire State of Rights Closed Captioned has been brought to you by Disability Rights New York, your source for disability rights and advocacy. If you enjoyed this program, and we hope you did, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this post. Tune in next time where we'll bring you more information on disability rights in the state of New York. The closed captioned version of this podcast is available on our YouTube channel.